Alright guys, today I'm going to tell you what preload is and how to adjust it, because there's a lot of misconception on this topic on YouTube. You're not changing the spring rate, you're not making it firmer or softer. Essentially, you're accommodating for a load. Now, essentially what you're doing is when you're preloading it, you're changing the spring height. But you're not supposed to change your car's height, because this is all one assembly. That's why it's a coilover. But the spring, however, when you change the height, you're not changing the spring rate, because the spring rate is a given force per a given distance. For example, kg per meter. That's a good reference, or newtons per meter. So essentially, when you're changing the height, you're just accommodating for a load. It's going to be the same spring rate. So what you do is you loosen these collars, so counterclockwise, clockwise, and when you spin this clockwise, you're essentially I'm spinning the top collar, by the way. You're changing the preload, and you're making the spring less compressed. See how I have motion now? Now when I spin it counterclockwise, putting a load on it. So now there's no movement when I'm spinning it counterclockwise. Essentially, that's how you set the preload. What you want to notice is on a spring, it says, for mine at least, it's 10K 200. 10K is the spring rate, 200 is the size of the spring in length, 200 millimeters. When you have zero preload, you're at 200 millimeters for the height. That is the number one misconception. I saw a guy on YouTube say, just tighten it until you can't tighten it with your hand anymore. You could still tighten it after 200 meters. You might be at 194 starting your initial preload. Your initial preload starts at 200 millimeters. So get a tape measure, measure it from the top. It should be 7 7/8. So right now I did move it a bit, but I'm pretty close to 7 7/8. Essentially, this is an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this. I'm going to thread it back counterclockwise. Okay. This is my zero starting position. This is my datum. Your datum is your reference point. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to spin this top collar to where essentially you're compressing the spring. And that distance between this this top collar and bottom collar, the distance between that is your preload. If I have 5 millimeters of gap between that, I have a 5 millimeter preload. So essentially, that is how you set your preload properly. Obviously, there's going to be special instances when it comes to corner balancing, and you have to change your whole setup on your shock assembly. But for a reference, if you're just putting a coilover on, you're slapping it on, and you want to get a good understanding of what that is, that's exactly how you set it. Engineering wise, this makes sense. I don't know how some people have learned how to do preload, but from an engineering standpoint, this is 100% the legit way of doing it. So I'm kind of new to this topic, not like a veteran or anything, but I'm also not a noob to this topic. So if you have any questions, try and ask me. I'll try to help you out. And when you're adjusting the height of the coilover, you're essentially just spinning this whole assembly. And I would measure the thread distance. If this locking collar is all the way down, if you want to get the height difference, measure just the threads and then change it based on the new thread distance. Always keep it as like this as your datum and this as your y, or like your height. So when you're changing that, you're changing the overall length of the coilover assembly. So yeah, thank you guys.